Welcome to Strictly Business, Variety's weekly podcast featuring conversations with industry leaders about the business of media and entertainment. I'm Tyler Aquilina with Variety Intelligence Platform. Today's episode is all about the connected TV ad market, that segment of the digital advertising business that includes almost all streaming video ads, as well as advertising on the smart TV interfaces many of us use every day. The CTV market is expanding rapidly, but it's also facing some major growing pains. The digital ad pipelines remain complicated and often confusing. Amazon Prime Video recently brought a flood of new inventory to market, depressing ad prices. And then there's YouTube, which is increasingly dominating TV screens as well as mobile, making it difficult for other players to compete for viewers and ad dollars. There's a lot to discuss, and today's guest will get into all of it. Dave Bernath is General Manager of the Americas at Wurl, a subsidiary of AppLovin that helps connect streaming content owners and advertisers. Dave began his career in the cable TV business, but now he has a front row seat to the changes playing out in the streaming TV space. He's an expert in content strategy, as well as the FAST space, that's free ad-supported streaming TV, and the perfect guest to break down this complex but vitally important business. All right, Dave Bernath, the General Manager for the Americas at Wurl. Welcome to the podcast, Dave. So I do want to start off by talking a little bit about what Wurl does and your place in the obviously very complex connected TV landscape. Can you tell us just a bit about what you guys do?
Sure. Yeah, Wurl is really the power, the tech behind a lot of streaming channels and programmatic advertising across CTV. So think of big brands like A&E Networks or Bloomberg or Scripps with Ion, and then endpoints like Samsung and LG and Pluto. We power those channels that are on those services, really thousands of channels globally across, hundreds of endpoints. And that means you're talking about literally billions of hours of viewing every month. And across that footprint, then giving our advertising partners access to really over 90 billion avails a month. So we're a key technology provider across the ad-supported streaming space. And we're also fortunate to be owned by a company called AppLovin, who's a dominant player in the mobile performance marketing ecosystem. And we sort of act as their streaming arm. They bought us a number of years ago. They're a great owner. And together we have sort of a robust innovation culture, which is kind of in their DNA. And so it's exciting to be in the space we're in and also to have the backing of ownership like AppLovin.
Yeah, for sure. So it sounds like you guys have a pretty, up close view to, what's going on in the streaming space and the streaming advertising space specifically. That space really seems to be poised at a transformative moment right now. What are some of the big picture questions that the industry's been grappling with recently based on the conversations that you've been having?
Yeah, I think at the highest level, if we're being very simplistic about it, historically, money usually follows the audience from platform to platform. And we're in a lag, right? I don't know what the exact numbers are. I've seen graphs from Evan Shapiro and other people that, and we have the Nielsen gauge, but roughly, let's call it, 10 to 15% of television ad spend is in the streaming space, but 45 and growing percent of the viewership is in streaming. So there's a really big imbalance. So at the highest level, that kind of is the beginning and the end of the discussion. What are the things that need to happen to get that money to move to where the audience already is? So I think it's probably worth pausing after that comment because that's kind of is the overarching theme. There's a lot of things inside of that, right. But I think that's certainly the main point.
Yeah. Well, what does need to happen for that? What, in your opinion, are some of the things that would help to, help the industry move to a more, to a space that, more adequately represents where the viewership is actually going?
Yeah. I think, a common currency around measurement and standardization is definitely an issue. We all, groaned about Nielsen forever, and I come from the cable TV business by background, but as imperfect as the currency was, it was a currency. GRPs, Nielsen ratings, share, all these kind of basic fundamental building blocks of measuring audiences were there, agreed upon, transacted upon. We don't have that in CTV. And so every year I see the panels, everyone talks about collaboration, everyone talks about getting there. but I'm still waiting to see significant movement in that regard. And that's certainly needed because planners need to be able to measure cross-platform and buy across the ecosystem in a consistent fashion rather than, buy multiple campaigns inside of various walled gardens with different metrics and first-party reporting, et cetera. So I really hope with IAB's leadership and everyone saying the right thing, that'll start to move in that direction. But certainly measurements is a big one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about, I think we hear a lot about how complicated the CTV marketplaces are. Is that an issue that continues to be a headache for the key players?
Yeah, I think you're right. If you look at a LumaScape chart, it can be a little mind-numbing across all the different DSPs and SSPs and DMPs and other providers that are a part of the programmatic ad stack, if you will. And you obviously have big players like the Trade Desk, but where buyers can buy, across various platforms. And we have the Roku, Amazon announcement, but it's just so much more complicated, than it is in legacy television. I'm not a expert on these various pieces. I just know enough to be dangerous and to try to help us grow our business. Mm-hmm. And we certainly are in the solutions business. So Wurl is really focused on how to make any part of this ecosystem more efficient, more optimized, more understandable, more transactable. Mm-hmm. But it is very complicated. I was at I think it was maybe the Ad Club of New York, or maybe it was an IAB event, but some luminary got up and made a quip about how, we, the collective, we had kind of blown it with the first, sort of chapters of how CTV had been created, and we need to kind of undo and rebuild a little bit. And I thought that was kind of funny.
Interesting. So then you say Wurl is kind of focused on, solutions. What are some of the strategies that you guys are looking at to help with that process?
Yeah, I'll give you a perfect example. You might think that in a digital age, because obviously at a high level, right, what makes CTV so exciting? Well, what makes it so exciting is that it's a digital delivery method that brings to television some of the capabilities that have worked on the web and in mobile, right? In terms of targeting, and you're going to see a different ad than I will because you live somewhere different. I'll see the Tri-State Ford dealership. You'll see the Southern California Ford dealership, assuming that you might be in LA, right. and on and on and on, right? And so that's super exciting. And you would think that the signals that are flowing through the ecosystem, like what's the genre of the show that's playing right now, would be consistent and easily, pass through the bid stream. It isn't. Folks have got, maybe not great systems that manage their content. It's been moved to digital, but certain things were never created in the first place, or spellings are different. There's a whole can of worms about something as simple as what is the genre of the program that you're watching. And so at Wurl, we have the ability, because we're very content centric. We power fast channels. We work with content. We spin up all these channels globally. We have the tools to be able to, for example, normalize genre metadata across streams so that the buyer is able to count on getting a consistent information in order to buy across, say, news or sports or drama or something like that. So that's a big thing that we do. Like, we can help improve and normalize metadata. And I think that speaks to what I would say would be sort of our core competency, is that our supply and our ability to enhance supply with sharper signals, whether that's brand safety, whether that's brand discoveries, emotional contextual targeting, which I'm sure we'll talk about, which is super cool, because that's really going to help, right? Is because if the signal is unclear, then people can't buy what they want to buy. And so, we're sort of in the supply enhancement signal business in many ways on the ad side. And I'm really excited about what we're able to add to the situation there.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, how has the increases in supply in the streaming ad space recently, how is that impacting things? Obviously, Amazon Prime Video launched advertising recently, and there's been a lot of chatter about how that's kind of flooded the market with supply. What's been the impact of that from your perspective?
Just downward pressure on CPMs, to put it simply. Like I said, I come from the TV business, so I'm not a legacy like display or web guy. But I know enough about that space to know that in some ways that has become a race to the bottom with endless impressions and smaller rates. God forbid we let that happen to CTV because it is the largest screen in the household. These are non-skippable units. We know the time spent of people's eyeballs on the glass when an ad plays is unbelievable compared to mobile and web. Now we add on the layer of digital targeting. CPMs should be, macroeconomic conditions notwithstanding, they should be healthy and growing. And I think people say this at every cocktail party at Cannes, right? It's like, the downward pressure on CPMs is very concerning. So,
just to clarify, CPMs are this ad standard. That's cost per meal. That's the cost for delivering 1,000 views. Yeah.
To my earlier macro point, the audience is growing. So, and the demand has been, has not followed. So then you throw on top of that, increased supply, more viewership, more potential impressions, but a lot of money that's not already there. So we're not really poised to take advantage of the growing audience at the moment, which is obviously another factor that's going to hurt us, on CPM. So, and then the sort of economic uncertainty around the economy is an additional probably drag on the situation.
Yeah. Has that been, the focus of a lot of conversations you've been having recently, the kind of uncertainty in the economic climate right now?
I would say from what I'm hearing from our teams is that, people say it, but we're not really seeing it turn up too much in the business yet. And I think maybe what I just said is true for everything. The stock market, unemployment, everything's just kind of still the same, while we all feel like there's these larger shifts happening that could turn south. So, Q4 will be the big question mark, right? Because that is such a big quarter for everybody. We don't have the political year that we had last year. So, that'll be the ultimate verdict probably on 2025 is what happens in Q4.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's shift gears a little bit. The rise of YouTube on connected TVs has been a big topic of discussion recently. I mean, really, it's been an ongoing thing for a long time, but the amount of press attention on it has kind of multiplied more recently. And I know you just did a presentation on this recently at the Stream TV show. So what we're seeing is consumers spending more time with YouTube on big screens, basically. What are some of the key trends that have driven this shift in consumption?
Yeah, well, I think I could talk about this subject for a while because it's so fascinating to me on many levels. I think we'd all probably agree that it's been a big surprise. And that, when we think of YouTube as an app on CTV, if we're going back 5-6 years, we think of it as kind of a utility. It's not really an entertainment destination. Of course it's there because everyone's got an app everywhere, right? And no economic arrangements with the platform to participate at that time, but maybe you don't think it's important if you're Samsung or Roku, right? Because it's just the second largest video search engine. It's not an entertainment destination. And just slowly but surely, it has just grown and grown and grown to where now not only is it, the number one essentially platform on television, even including like the Disney portfolio completely and everybody else, but for itself, YouTube in the United States, TV is now the number one consumption platform in terms of time spent. And so it's just kind of it's a sleeping giant that's kind of crept up, I think, on the industry. And you're right. Lots of attention is being paid. But one of the things I said in the keynote was that I still don't think the industry fully is grasping the trajectory YouTube is on and the implications of that trajectory. I feel like people have watched it, rise to this level, but aren't necessarily thinking to themselves, what if this continues? I made the point that, essentially 1 in 4 hours of streaming today in the US is on YouTube, a sentence that I still blows my mind. But it's likely to be 1 in 3 by the end of next year. Wow. And so, the platforms don't participate in the monetization. It's taking time away from the other ad-supported players in the space. And all the demos are watching. The fastest growing demo is 65 plus. which might make you say as an advertiser, okay, well, we know CBS is number one, but they don't have 18 to 49s. It's older people, but all the demos are growing. And if you look at the youngest demo, I think I quipped this in my keynote, the 2 to 11s, they over-index at 150%, right? And so you have to ask yourself, if they over-index at that level today as an 8-year-old, why would that change when they're 15, 21, 29, right? And so call that like a demographic tsunami that's going to creep through the age groups over the next 20, 30 years. If you're not sitting down with your partner to watch White Lotus season 6, right, in X number of years, but you just want to quote, see what's on, and that becomes YouTube, period, end of sentence, that's big news.
It's scary a little bit, I think.
I went a little melodramatic on you there, but and in the presentation, of course, I talk about the Albanian army quote of Jeff Bewkes, sort of dismissing Netflix, and I think Netflix has just astounded us all. It's just unbelievable what they've achieved. It's literally mind-boggling. You just got to tip your cap to what they've done. They've changed the whole entertainment landscape globally. I did have to laugh with Ted Sarandos' recent comment about, YouTube is in the killing time business and we're in the spending time business. I'm like,
Yeah. That certainly does seem to be changing. I think, you mentioned YouTube has really built itself into this entertainment destination. And I've had conversations where, it's the creators there are really focused on, driving more engagement, driving more kind of recognition for what they're doing, the viewership they're delivering, things like that. So it really does seem to be, again, a transformative moment for how the industry is approaching YouTube. What are some of the other implications, for major AVOD platforms, other players in the CTV space as YouTube kind of steals more time on these big screen devices that used to be the domain of these other platforms? How do they continue to compete?
I think, on the panel that you and I did together, I made the comment about feeling like things were plateauing a little bit in the kind of the fast AVOD space. And we had some pushback on the panel from some of the folks. I think one person agreed with me a little bit. And I meant it in a combination of monetization and audience growth, but also I think in the experience. And I say that in this moment, answering your question, because the UX of these devices, and these platforms and apps, are relatively similar, right? The sort of tile-based carousel and then an EPG for channels.
Right.
And I think that YouTube's success with short-form content, which constitutes about half of the viewership on CTV, certainly points to what you'd call the question of what is your short-form strategy, right? Mm-hmm. You're not going to really be able to go after YouTube holistically. That's crazy. But within sports, within, say, lifestyle, within certain categories, is there a more short-form, feed-like, personal way to consume content, discover content, find shows, movies that is more akin to the way that people bounce around social platforms and YouTube itself? I think there needs to be some experimentation there, and so like lessons from YouTube's success. You clearly high-profile creators from Mr. Beast on down are getting shots at having a show on Samsung or Prime Video or whatever, and that's great. I think that makes sense for both sides. That won't really have an impact on the overall trend. Those will just be the sort of the few that could graduate, quote unquote, to having a legitimate, quote unquote, show on these platforms. But the underlying overall trend of how people are using YouTube and the role of that short form personalized kind of content experience, how can you replicate that in some form that works for your platform? I think is definitely a sort of thing to be tackled, and it could be very exciting, right? For a platform.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I completely agree. I think we're long overdue for kind of a revolution in the streaming UX space.
I mean, I love the Tubi scenes, product on their phone. I'm sure they're going to bring it to CTV, and that's a very smart idea, right? I'm just scrolling through great moments from films, and I find something to watch that way versus going through key art, what a much more interesting, fun way to interact with my TV to find a movie to watch than scrolling through still images,
Right. Yeah, that's fascinating. I do want to touch on FAST briefly, because I know you deal with FAST channels and providers quite a bit. We've talked about that space is also maturing and kind of plateauing a little bit. How has the FAST sector specifically kind of been changing recently as it matures?
Yeah, I think yesterday I was actually physically in the office in New York City with a major cable company that we work with that has, double-digit numbers of FAST channels. And what they said, which I have heard from other big clients of ours, is that their focus now is on sort of refining their approach. They've got their 20 channels, their 30 channels. Some of them are crushing it. Some of them are lagging. Some of them maybe need a little refresh. And so their focus is on really quality and, honing in on what's working, maybe making some decisions about sunsetting certain concepts or ideas, trying new things. So there was kind of a rush there, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, maybe a little bit further back. WBD wasn't in the game. NBCU wasn't in the game. They both came to the market with, literally dozens of channels. That wave has happened. And so the platforms themselves are starting to sort of look at, winnowing the herd a bit, cutting back a little bit, wanting to make sure that they've got the best channels. The content providers themselves, after rushing in with so many channels. So I think you're seeing a kind of refinement and, curation and that kind of approach versus, 5 years ago when it was really kind of a land grab for beachfront property. So that's what's happening broadly with the big guys. The smaller guys, are facing that challenge. Maybe they were a digitally native brand on YouTube or, and they were able to get fast carriage across the ecosystem 6-7 years ago. And now they're maybe, dealing with some pressure on their numbers and how do they get them up. And so, we're not in a real big expansion mode. I think we're in kind of a solidifying and focusing on quality, which I think is good. It's good because, we kind of quickly replicated some version of cable, 250, 350 before you know it. And I don't know that that's necessarily the way to go. So
interesting. To circle back to an earlier topic a bit, I was just reading an article that the increase in supply, among subscription ad-supported platforms has also put more pressure on the FAST space, because advertisers want to be on what they perceive as these premium platforms as opposed to these channels that are showing older content. Have you been seeing the impact of that from conversations that you've been having?
I would say the impact is maybe a little bit more back up this food chain or the upstream or some metaphor that I'm mangling, in the sense that I think that advertisers, savvy buyers, I think, understand that fast channels are in many ways just like cable. They are high quality library. That's what most of cable TV is. Even if you're going to buy The Bear or The Daily Show, right, on Comedy Central or FX, your buy includes a wide swath of run of network placements that are across repeats of old sitcoms and old shows from South Park, you name it, Always Sunny. That's what you're getting, and so FAST doesn't have that Tiffany premiere piece, but if you're looking for the right audience, right, you're still talking about premium television content. So I think there's some level of FAST doesn't quite get its due. And so I think that's a bit of a factor before the SVODs even bring in an ad tier, right? And so that feeds into that probably reality a little bit, as you just mentioned, because they have those bright, shiny, new, fantastic shows that can be the hook for someone to make a buy. But so I think there's some education around that. But again, back to my point, right? Whether it's 12, 13% of the money, 40, 50% of the viewing, do you want to reach the audience or not? Right? If you're trying to sell hamburgers or get people to go on a vacations to the Bahamas, with your ad, and they're watching, the Baywatch channel on FAST, or Axemen, or Ion on a FAST service, for a couple hours on a Tuesday evening, that's a premium moment to catch them,
Yeah. Yeah. And, I would be surprised if, after Tubi aired, that their Super Bowl simulcast this year, I would be surprised if that trend didn't continue. CBS has next year's Super Bowl, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm curious if they'll integrate it with Pluto TV in any way.
And they made the savvy decision to require people to register because, one of the things that just to do a little circle back when we talk about YouTube, you have a lot of personalization, and not everyone, in my house, when I hit YouTube on my CTV, it asks me, obviously which one of us, because I have a couple kids, I click on my icon, boom, I'm into Dave's YouTube. I know some households, maybe it's moms or dads but in general, you have a significant portion of people that are within their YouTube experience on CTV, which is the ultimate level of personalization. Whereas a Pluto or a Tubi heretofore, right, wants to have as a free service as little friction as possible, right? They might give you an option to sign in or register, but you can skip it. And so Tubi was wise to use the Super Bowl as a way to drive registration. I think you'll see Pluto and others. And then you think of it beyond that. Well, how much more could we try to force this on our users? We might lose a few folks. There might be some churn, but on the other side, right, if X percent say, okay, cool, look at the way you could up your level of personalization and understanding your audience. So that's another factor. And obviously the SVOD guys have a different dynamic. They've got that already because you're having to pay.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. Last question. Do you have a go-to fast channel that you go to for your personal quote unquote lean back viewing?
One of the things that, fast has followed cable a little bit, right, in many ways. And like cable, it's largely, repeats of great library for now. And over time, it's going to slowly get more and more like TV and probably have some original programming. There are people actually making things for fast. The reason why I'm saying this is because that means that sports will be the last thing to get to fast in a meaningful way. But one of the first things that came into fast, which is a really great product, is news. The news on fast is awesome. I mean, you just turn on, whether it's NBC Now or, Bloomberg. So, I find that like having that right there, I can just pop on and watch the news, and it's like as good as anything on quote television, is pretty cool and is a really strong value. And I don't feel like I'm watching like some streaming lesser than version of regular television. So I would say news. News is a big one for me on fast.
Interesting. Well, obviously lots to discuss with these topics, but unfortunately we're going to have to leave it there. But I want to thank you again, Dave, for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you, Tyler.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to leave us a review at Apple Podcasts or Amazon Music. We love to hear from listeners. Please go to Variety.com and sign up for the free weekly Strictly Business newsletter. And don't forget to tune in next week for another episode of Strictly Business.